Hello and welcome back to our further discussion on social media marketing. Today we're going to be covering Chapter 2, which deals with goals and strategies. So by the time you finish this chapter with listening either to this video or reading the book, hopefully you're reading the book, you can pick up some additional things. You'll understand what a social media plan is, what that planning cycle is, what are the different stages for listening and observing. We'll also talk about ways that you can listen for content about your social media plan, how you go about setting your goals and objectives, exactly what those are, how do you distinguish between the two. We'll look at some type of strategy that you might have, and then finally look at how you go about self-promoting or building a bunch of people that are advocates for your product or service. And then lastly, we'll follow that up with best practices for developing your social media strategy. So you should understand what that is and why you're doing it. So the question becomes, what exactly is an SMM plan? So the plan needs to be such that it matches the organizational goals. And so the organizational goals then would also dictate what the marketing goals and plans are. And so the overall marketing strategy then would lead to what the SMM plan would be. And so they all need to be integrated, or you're not going to achieve the overall goal of what the organization wants to do. So keep that in mind. It's just not, come up with a plan and decide whatever you want to do. And if that doesn't match what your upper level organizational plans and strategies are, then that's not going to work, and that's not going to be good for the organization. And so as you begin to create this plan, keep in mind that it's a continuous process. It isn't just create it and then implement it and you're done. It's also an iterative process where you keep coming back to it and changing things or tweaking things based on the feedback you're getting from where you're listening. So part of that listening then also means that you might be trying out different things. So if you're doing something on Facebook, you might try posting certain pictures or asking your viewers to do certain things and see how that goes. If it doesn't work, you try something else. It could be as easy as changing a picture within an email newsletter to see how that might affect people responding to whatever you're asking them for. So as we look at this plan graphically, then you want to make sure you carry out everything that you see in the plan. So the social media planning life cycle, you can think of it starts here with listening. From there, you want to listen to what your customers are saying, and then set your goals, set your strategies, identify your target audience, think about the tools that you're going to need to do that with. Then you finally implement it, you monitor it, you fine-tune it, and that whole process continues. So that's some of the things we'll be talking about. So when we talk about listening, we're talking about where you're going to listen for the information that you need in order to come up with a good SMM plan. And so your book talks about competitive intelligence. And so you want to look and see what people are saying about you, about your competitors, about your industry, so that you can get a better feel for what's going on and what you might have to do in order to come up with a good plan. From your listening then, you want to set some goals. And so part of these goals is part of what you're looking at in terms of defining your strategy. And so to define your strategy, you do something called a SWOT analysis. Now, your book mentions SWOT, but it doesn't really go into a lot of terminology about exactly what you're looking for. So SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So strengths and opportunities are typically internal to the organization. But here they're also using it to think about, look at your competitors and see what their strengths and opportunities are. The weaknesses and threats are typically going to be external to the organization. So again, you will look at what are those things outside the organization that might hurt us, things that we're weak on, that our competitors might take advantage of and hurt us on. And then we also want to look at these SWOT analysis for the industry to see what things we might want to take advantage of within the industry to get a competitive advantage, or things that we see in the industry that might hurt us, that we can do things differently so that the impact, should it happen, will not be as great on us. And so we would look at those things. So there's a lot to actually setting goals, and your book doesn't go into a lot of detail on doing those things. In terms of strategy, we'll talk about the 8 C's of strategy development later on. But you need to think about something that's going to give you a competitive advantage, and hopefully a sustained competitive advantage. Then that next step is identifying the target audience or your market. And so that target audience could be based on demographics, could be based on location, geography. It just depends on how you want to identify and have a view of that target market, that people that are in that target market you can actually target and see how well your plan is going to work on them. Then in terms of selecting tools, you might want to think about which social media technologies are out there that you want to use based on that target audience. I'll go over it again and again because it's probably one of the most recognized results of looking at social media in terms of younger people might be using something like Snapchat, and an older demographic would be into Facebook. And that's not to say that younger people aren't looking at Facebook periodically, but they're not as much as an older demographic. Again, so depending on who your target audience is, then you've got to select the right tools that you're going to use to market to them and to also listen to them. The tools could also include things like search engine optimization. So when you see an acronym like SEO, that's what they're talking about, search engine optimization. What do you do in order to get people to find you when they do a search on the internet? So if it's an organic search, meaning that they didn't pay for the result to come up, you've got to do things to your website or whatever it's looking at, whatever search engine, depending on the media that you're using, can find you easily. And so those are some also tools that we might be talking about. In terms of platforms and channels, that's probably more like what I was talking about earlier in terms of, is it Facebook, is it Twitter, is it Instagram, is it Foursquare, any of those different platforms, different ways of reaching that target audience. But first you got to know where your target audience is using or likes to use. The next area is the implementation, and here you're going to implement your goals and your strategies You're going to select that target market and then use a specific platform to go after that. So you could be using different platforms again across uh, different audiences, or maybe the same audience, just to see how the different platforms might be used to see which one is most effective for that particular audience or market. And as you implement that, then you've got to monitor that. And so you got to think about how often you're going to send out some kind of communication, and how long are you going to monitor that to see how well it's working. What I mean by that is when you send out, say, something in Facebook, how long does it take to get a response back? What are your peak response times? What are your minimum response times in terms of, okay, I put something out on Facebook, I got 1 or 2 hits within the day, but I got most of my hits on day 3 after that post. And it may just be you need to monitor daily. Sometimes you need to monitor it a couple times a day, or maybe you need to monitor it every minute to see what the response is. There are some companies that are always putting things out because that's what their audience wants, and so they'll monitor that to see how they're responding. And then based on that feedback, you're going to do some tuning to improve your marketing towards your target audience. So if we look at how this book is structured, then for this chapter we'll be looking at, identifying the target audience. Chapters 5 through 12 then look at different platforms and implementation and how you would do the execution of strategies in social media, specific tactics that you might implement. So next we're going to look at the listening and observing. There's actually several stages for that. So when you're listening, you're performing that initial step. There are different stages that you need to look at. The first stage there is you want to listen to conversations about your brand or company. So that's what you're looking for. Anything that talks about the brand that you're marketing or your specific company that deals with that particular brand. Then you want to listen to what people are saying about your competitors. So that may be positive or negative. You want to find out what they're doing. You can think about how, just the first 2 there, if you think about what has gone on in university or collegiate athletics in terms of recruitment. And so, I've talked to certain athletes that have been in my class in the past, and I've asked them, do the coaches, when they're recruiting you, are they tweeting you a lot? And they all said yes, they get tons and tons of tweets. And so you have to ask yourself, how did that come about? How does an athletic director or a coach know to start tweeting these potential athletes to come to their schools? And so again, here's what they're doing. They listen to what is being said about their brand or company, and they're also listening and seeing what their competitors are doing. You'd be hard pressed to not be trying to use these social media applications to recruit people when your competitors are doing that. And so that's what we're after here, is you want to listen and see what's going on, see what your competitors are doing. Then you want to listen to what people are saying about the industry or category. And so if you think about it, you're starting out, with a small area that you're listening to, you're getting it a little larger, your competitors, and now you're looking at the entire industry. And so what you're trying to find out then is this tone of your entire community. Is this something that you should be working in? Is this something you should be actually trying to change the tone of the community? And so with this information then, You also have to look at different social media platforms and different channels that you want or need to be looking at. So is it Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, Pinterest, so on? There are all types of social media platforms out there. So your book goes into some detail showing you how different companies actually are listening and observing what's going on with social media and their particular brand. So one example is the National Football League was listening to Super Bowl conversations. And so if they look at the 2015 Super Bowl, they noticed that there were 24.8 million game related tweets. And so from that, they could analyze that and get an impression of what the tone was, the sentiment of the fans were, and so on. And they could use that information to target those fans with certain products or services that they wanted to sell them from the National Football League, that is. And then there's the example of the business-to-business marketing. So you've got B2B, you could have C2B, which would be consumer to business, but here, even a business to business, they're having to go through that same process to see what their competitors are doing, their customers' sentiment is toward them, what their industry is like, and so on. And so it doesn't matter what type of e-commerce relationship you have, whether it's B2B, C2B, and so on, you need to go through that entire process, those different phases of listening and coming up with your social media plan. So here's an example from your book that shows how the Super Bowl social media application was working with tweets. So if you look at traditional media, which would be using TV, you'd have an advertisement of 30 seconds and, maybe 112 million people would see it. Was that really brand engagement or not? How successful was it? Versus mobile. Mobile, you have 125 million people that are viewing those tweets. How many times did it get seen? There may have gotten seen 576 million or more. And so you're looking at impressions. So people are seeing that come up on their screen somehow. It could be social, video, so on. And so they know that there's going to be some brand engagement there. So they're actually talking about the brand of whatever it was that came up. And so here they know for sure that there was some kind of engagement on that brand, whereas over here with traditional TV making marketing, there wasn't. So now we have a more focused way to market our brand. And so that's what mobile, having a social media plan, can do for you. And here we have the listening monitors that Cisco was using for its business-to-business marketing. And so you have different maps. So this is a heat map showing where things about Cisco are being discussed and stuff. And so you can actually geographically map where the social media is taking place and what's being talked about, if it's being mentioned or not, retweeted, and so on. We can also look at different conversations and see a map of that and see what's talked about most. So that's what this little monitor here is showing. And so the point is that, depending on the size of the company you're working for, there's going to be a need for somebody to be monitoring what is being said through these social media apps so that you can get a better feel of what's going on. If you're not monitoring it, chances are your competitors are. And if they are, then they're going to try and use that to their advantage, which then puts you at a disadvantage because you're not even set up to be using that type of technology in order to help you with your marketing. I'm going to go ahead and pause here, and when we come back, we'll start with setting goals and objectives.